Welcome back again. I hope the first two parts have already been digested and now you're ready for part B. So, like I said, we should always pay attention to the exam verb that has been kept, and for further help, you should go to the ACCA website, whereby they talk. There's an article on study skills whereby they explain about exam verbs. So in this particular exam verb that we're going to be talking about in this part B, it's comment. And with comment, it really means to express an opinion and also to give an explanation, illustration, or criticism. So here, in this situation where we're talking about ethical and professional issues, there are key factors that you need to put in place. So as we've said, there are two parts of this question, whereby there's to comment on the ethical and professional issues, and there's also to recommend any actions which should now be taken by Thomasson & Company. Like I said, here in this question, it particularly talks about identifying the significant threats to audit independence and recommend any actions or any safeguards in particular to lower them to an acceptable level. So in here, it's not, you don't get just a mark for identifying the threat. You also have to explain why. Why is that a threat? So if we go to the case study specifically, we can see that there are certain areas, especially on the taxation services here under this part. So here, that's where I've heavily highlighted. Okay. So here is points that we're going to talk about. Like on the taxation services, we find that it creates a self-review threat. And one particular thing that most students really, I think, fall victim to is actually reiterating the entire, maybe they take this paragraph and they write entirely that involves, like, you established that Thomasson Company performed taxation computation of clinical and complete tax returns. So this actually will waste a lot of time for you. So it's better to go straight to the point, like just saying that performance of the company tax computation creates a self-review threat. You see how easy that has been compared to just writing the entire, like you say, like Thomasson Company performs taxation, like that wastes a lot of time for you. So just say performance of the company tax computation creates a self-review threat. So up to the point you're not getting any mark from the examiner, not any mark. But so what you have to do is, like, you have to now explain why you think it creates a self-review threat. So there is whereby you talk about the threat, the self-review threat arises when the auditor reviews work which they themselves have previously performed. So in the situation, you find that they're not only involved in just auditing, but they're involved in the process of preparing the financial statements and then audits them. Like, that's an example as to why you can find, like, the auditor reviews work that they have actually performed. So in this situation, the risk is that the auditor will not be sufficiently objective because they will be hesitant or let's say resistant to performing an auditor whereby to perform the audit, and they may not find any shortcomings because it's their own work. So someone will be biased, like the auditor has, like, they have done their auditing work that they have previously done, so they will be biased, like, my work is clean, so I don't think there are any shortcomings. But so that really creates a bias for themselves. So that's whereby it creates the self-review threat. So in this situation, the auditor independence will be threatened because the tax calculation forms the basis of the tax payable and the tax charge in the financial statements, right? Because if they're doing the tax computation, that means that they will have to compute the tax payable and the tax charge, which is in the financial statements, and they will have to audit that, right? So they can't be able to perform an audit on the same tax charge that they have actually computed. So that's where the self-review threat comes in. So in the situation, it creates that self-review threat, and they will be a bit reluctant to find any shortcomings when it comes to the point of auditing something that they've actually computed. So another point that you see, like, we've already identified the threat, whereby we've talked about that the company tax competition creates a self-review threat, and the self-review threat arises when the auditor reviews work that they themselves have previously performed. So this situation, you have to explain clearly, like, how is that self-review threat going to happen? So you're going to talk about um, the auditor, if they will perform like if they're performing tax calculations, they will reach the point of creating maybe tax payable and tax charge in the financial statements. So even the audit team may be when it comes to point of audit procedures on the tax charge and tax payable, they may be reluctant to find any shortcomings, because they know that they've done something, that they've completed something that is already like correct in their minds, but it's actually like a biased assessment for them. So another thing that we're going to talk about here, that another threat. So whenever it comes, let me just recap a bit. Whenever you have certain things about ethical and professional issues, it's very important to clearly identify the threat, assess the significance of that threat, and then recommend the necessary safeguards to reduce that threat to an acceptable level. So you have to go through those key things that I've mentioned right now. So the other part would be advocacy threat. There is also potential indicator of advocacy threat, because when the auditor is asked to promote or present the client in some way, that means that it's an advocacy threat, whereby the auditor has to promote the interests of the client. So in this situation, we have like if they're preparing doing the tax computation, and if there's a third party like tax authorities that have to be involved, that means that you have to call in your auditor, right? Who was real, and this auditor does your tax computation, right? So that creates an advocacy threat. So that means that they can't be fully objective in this situation. So it creates a potential advocacy threat. So the other part that we're going to talk about is the website and online sales system. Like, I have highlighted it clearly here. Where is it? The entire thing here. So here you've been told about Mr. Blackers doing like okay, you're talking about Mr. Blackers. He informed you that Clinical is planning to develop a new website in order to offer online sales to its customers. He has asked Thomasson Company to provide assistance with the design and information of the website. Okay. So in the situation here where there is also clearly an indicator of self-review threat, because as I said, a self-review threat arises when the auditor performs an audit on work that they have, an auditor reviews work which they themselves have previously performed. So here, in terms of like design and implementation of the website and online sales system, so here it means that they're going to like perform work that will require them to design and implement a sales system, which will produce data, and that data will be used directly in the preparation of the financial statements. So you see here, it's kind of like it's work already they've performed, and which, if it comes to the audit phase, they will have to audit that work that they have actually previously performed. So it creates a self-review threat, which is a very which threatens their independence. So they won't be actually objective when it comes to the audit part. So in the situation, because even when it comes to audit, when they do test of controls, it means they'll still be reviewing and testing financial data and systems which Thomasson Company helped design and implement. Therefore, there is a clear risk that the audit team may too readily place reliance on these systems. So it's human nature. You can't talk bad about yourself or anything. So, or like that, you can't represent yourself like that. So I hope you get the gist here. So in the situation, with reference again to providing assistance in the design and implementation of the website and online sales system, in terms of like self-review threat, we're still the self-review threat. The auditor will audit sales figures which were generated by the system, and this may make the firm, like there's this part whereby they'll assume management responsibility. So there's a risk here of assuming management responsibility. That means that it's actually work that should be handled by management decisions. That's why it's very key to that's why it's very key for an auditor before like doing the performing the audit. They have to like uh, clearly state to the client that these are my duties and these are your responsibilities. So thereby there cannot be any form of misunderstanding along the way. So here, in terms of like design and implementation of the website and online sales system, it may pose a risk for assuming management responsibility. So that means that they may have to make decisions which have to be actually made by the management. So in this situation, um, the auditor needs to make sure that they are able to clearly define their responsibilities to the client, because this is too much of a high risk, and therefore they need to clearly set guidelines, like to make sure that the management is the one who has that decision to in the design and implementation, and not the auditor. So it seems clear that the new online sales system will be significant to the client's financial statements and records. And as we said, the code states that a self-review threat may be too significant even for an unlisted client, such as CleanCo, unless a process were put in place. So here, when as our lighting, it's also very key to also note down um, if that client is it unlisted or listed, because for a listed company, that means that an auditor cannot provide both audit and non-audit services. They have to provide one of them. So it has to be, if it's audit, just focus on audit. But this being an unlisted company, so there is no they can put some safeguards to reduce that self-review threat. And the possible safeguards that they may use in managing the self-review threat could be: the client should acknowledge its responsibility for establishing and monitoring the system of internal controls. And that's why I talked about, like, the client should be actually aware between their duties and the responsibilities of the auditor. So there has to be clear definition in a separate engagement letter to ensure that the client makes all management decisions in relation to the design and implementation process, so that it does not give the auditor any form of responsibility of making that management decision. Because this clearly, if management leaves that decision to the auditor, it may pose a threat even beyond, it can go even to litigation, because they offer that. And so they have to like put clear separation of duties in the engagement letter to make sure that the client makes all those decisions by themselves without actually involving the auditor in it. So like I said, this is an unlisted company, so there might be no strict rules to actually just provide one service, like a listed company, whereby you're not supposed to offer both audit and non-audit services. So in this situation, since it's an unlisted company, you can put in the exam as an answer that a clear safeguard could be to have a separation of teams. They call it the Chinese wall. So there has to be separate teams whereby made up of non-audit staff who can do the tax computation, who can do anything that's not related to the audit, and they can who now can perform the systems design and implementation assignment. And in the situation, if they're doing this work, they should also have like an independent party to do an professional review. And you have to also note down, if the threat cannot be reduced to an acceptable level, or the engagement will result in uh, the firm assuming a management responsibility, the service should not be provided. So if you find like it's too significant of a threat, then you shouldn't provide it. You should just decline the work and do the audit by itself. And the other point to note down would be on the office party. So on the office party here, I've noted down like certain things, like the team with the free voucher and stuff. Like I said, you shouldn't take the paragraph, then you should not paste it on the question paper. It wastes so much time for you. So what you should do is to actually just go straight to the point and say, maybe you talk about the hospitality on the part for attending the office party, it may create a familiarity threat. You just talk about that, just one sentence. So you can say, why is it a familiarity threat? You say that because when the auditor is too sympathetic or trusting the client because of the very form of a close relationship, this may result in the auditor not being what we say, not applying professional skepticism because they've already created a bond. So that kind of interaction might threaten the judgment of the auditor when it comes to auditing. So in the situation, there's a risk that as a result of attending the client office party, the audit staff may be getting too close to the client, especially according to this question, we see that it's an audit senior. Yeah, audit senior, Paula Metcalf. So in the situation, you find that the audit staff may be getting too close to the client staff, especially given that there's an audit senior. This practice is occurred every year. This close relationship may result in the audit team becoming less objective and less able to challenge explanations. Okay, so in the situation, you can talk about that. So like I've said, go straight to the point. Just say that on in the case of the attending the office party, it may be indicative of a familiarity. It may give rise to a familiarity threat. So that you won't get any mark for that. Just identify. You have to explain why it's a threat. So you talk about that since it's something that's been going on for a year, for years. Like here we talk about 3 years. It might show that the audit staff may be getting closer to the client staff, and this might hinder their judgment when it comes to doing their audit. So they won't apply professional skepticism in this situation. And the other part we can talk about is the gifts, because we've seen here it's a free voucher worth $30. So in this situation, when we can talk about like what does the code state. It's good to also, if you know like what the code of ethics states, you can put down and say maybe the code states that gifts from a client to an audit team member or staff, it may create a self-interest threat, because gifts can also create it can create a significant risk of a significant risk that arises from self-interest, and this can particularly depend on the value of that gift. So for instance, in this situation where there's $30 free gift voucher, you find that the auditor may be motivated to behave in a manner which protects, which aims, the auditor may seem to see it as like something like a buy-off or something. So with this office party, if in this situation they're getting like gift vouchers, it can create a self-interest threat, right? But you're also told, like, but for this case, you can also like put a point in case maybe you can support, maybe this, you can say that although they've been given a gift voucher, the value of the gift seems to be trivial, and you could talk about if the gift was of a significant nature, then this might be too significant to mitigate with the safeguards, and therefore the gift should not be accepted. So in this situation, you can just note down that if, okay, in my opinion, if the gift seems trivial, unless it's trivial, then the auditor should decline the gift unless it's considered trivial and doesn't create any consequences in between. So these are kind of things that we should note down, especially when it comes to commenting and recommending certain safeguards when it comes to ethical and professional issues. I hope you've gotten something from this, and please make sure to go to exam verbs under the ACCA site. You can talk about under study skills, you can go and learn about the exam verbs, which will help you a lot in trying to know what exactly you should put in place. And I hope you have a great study time, and stay safe.